It's 1:45. I'm going to kick us off. Welcome to AAA Academics. I want to get straight to the conversation, so just a little framing. This is a panel with several fantastic designers who have worked and been very successful in industry, who have recently been making the transition into academic institutions where they are teaching. We have a panel of wonderful, wonderful panelists. I will introduce them all quite briefly, but here immediately to my right is John Romero, who you may know from such games as Quake or Doom. He also currently teaches at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And to his right is Brenda Romero, who you may know from such wonderful projects as Train and Wizardry. And she also teaches at the University of California at Santa Cruz. To her right is Richard Lemarchand. Richard you may know from such projects as Soul Reaver and Uncharted, and Richard teaches at the University of Southern California. And finally, we have Warren Spector, who you may know from such projects as Deus Ex or Disney's Epic Mickey, and he now teaches at the University of Texas at Austin. So, like I said, I want to dive right into this. I'm going to ask some questions, and hopefully we're going to have an interesting conversation here. When I run out of questions, if there's some magical, theoretical time at the end, we may even take a few audience questions for the panel to answer. So, I want to start right away by asking how the four of you ended up entering the academic field. Can you talk just a little bit about how you became interested in teaching in academia, whether you were approached by an academic institution or you'd harbored a long passion for it, maybe you'd been part-time lecturing?
Okay, I'm going. Well, before I got into games, as anything but an amateur, I mean, in the 70s, God, I'm really old. But in the 70s, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons and all those, Avalon Hill board games and games like Champions, created partly by the person sitting in the front row here. And at the same time, I was working on my doctorate at the University of Texas and figured I was heading for a career in teaching. It's a long, sordid story why I ended up making games instead, which I will tell you if things get really slow. But I always thought I was going to teach at some point. I just didn't think it was going to be quite this soon. I've been making games for 30 years. Which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. It either kills you or keeps you young making games. But the University of Texas actually, after many, many years of many of us twisting arms, they finally said, we're going to start a development program. And the day came when I said, hey, wait a minute, if anybody but me is directing that, I'm going to be really upset. So I agreed to do it, and I hope I get back to making games or make some games on the side. But right now, a little too soon, I'm a full-time academic.
So for my part, I guess that I'd always kind of wanted to be back in higher education ever since I graduated college. I actually remembered telling my friends soon after I joined the game industry in the early 90s that one day I would have a doctorate of ludology. Nice. And they all laughed at me, but
I want that degree.
I'll show them. I mean, yes.
Yeah,
and now we have doctorates of ludology. So I started volunteering at USC in around about 2004, visiting classes, giving talks, eventually mentoring students in the MFA program. I got involved with Indiecade in 2009. I've been speaking at GDC since 2008. So I think all of these things were connecting together for me when at Indiecade, actually, in 2010, I vividly remember where I was. I was ironing a shirt in Eric Zimmerman's hotel room, and I had this sudden realization that I was heading towards sort of a crossroads in my professional life, one of these times when we can where we have an opportunity to make a choice. It was about halfway through the development of Uncharted 3, and I realized that while I'd had the most amazing time working at Naughty Dog, it was a superlative place to be, I had this opportunity to pursue the love for games and play as art and culture that I'd always nurtured, really since the beginning of my time in the industry. So as I started talking to my friends about what I might do next, one of the friends I spoke to was Tracy Fullerton, who's the chair of the Interactive Media and Games division that I'm now a part of, and Tracy suggested that there might be a role available for me. So I chased it up, and here I am.
For me, mine was really a happy coincidence. I've gone into academia and then back into the industry, and now I'm academia/industry. My current role actually requires me to remain active in the industry, which is exactly what I want. The first time, it was really one of jealousy almost. The guy, is taking college classes. I love learning. And as a frontline lead designer, you know, I envied my friends who were talking, like, books that have been read, you know, that were written that I just had no time to read, or discussions that I wanted to have about games at a level that we just couldn't do when we're trying to hit milestone after milestone after milestone. So much like you, I was at a transition point, and I happened to see an ad looking for a game designer to teach. So I ended up accepting that job, and for me, once I got in there, it was really working with the students that made it irresistible and why I had to go back. Like, my favorite classes to teach are the Intro to Game Development classes, because for many students, they've gotten, you know, they're maybe 18 or 19, this is the first class they've ever taken in game development. They've been told all their lives, you know, you want to do what? You want to go to college for this? You're going to pay money for people to teach you games? And you see the first time that they're in that classroom and somebody there is validating what they've wanted to do for 18 years, and they're on fire and they've got so much passion, that's a drug to me. You know, I love that, and so, you know, that's why I keep teaching. That's how I got here, and that's why I keep doing it.
I was asked by a professor at UT Dallas, I think in 2002, to teach a class. And so I did that probably for like a semester. It was a cross-platform game development class. And when it was over, they basically told me, hey, why don't we create a curriculum and like do a game degree here at UTD? And I was just like, this is not the place to learn game development. You know, I'd seen Full Sail, and I was like, that is like really intense. I kind of believe in, like, you immerse yourself every day for as long as you possibly can in learning how to make games, and that's all you do. So I just said, this isn't the place. We need a college, you know, here in Dallas to do that. So I came up with the idea for the Guildhall at SMU, and worked with these people to kind of find the right people to start that school. Mostly because I needed to hire people at my company, and I want them to come from Dallas. I want them to like be local and just like come on over and start working. So I never taught at the Guildhall. I just kind of started it, and then later, basically working with UC Santa Cruz with my wife Brenda. We worked there for a little while, basically shepherding students through their final quarter of their BS degree, and had been talking to them about starting a new like master's degree program at UCSC. So that's what we developed and what we're doing right now. And it's a blast getting to work with, you know, people that know how to code, but they really want to learn more about design and how to develop really great games. And so that's kind of what we're doing now. It's really fun.
I mean, it's exciting for me to hear that you all sort of have a passion for teaching or for reaching the students or for being involved in these institutions. You know, it seems like in the end, whether you were recruited or had tinkered around it, there's a joy or a desire that's drawing you in. But also, like Brenda mentioned, she gets to now be half-time academic, half-time industry. So what are the obstacles, the challenges that you found to taking these positions, whether they're challenges of mind, this is a choice that I'm giving something up and I'm going to have to take this other thing, what are you giving up? And what are the other more logistical or odd challenges that I'm not thinking of that you might have encountered?
Well, at the top of my list in my notes, I have fear and self-doubt, which are, I suppose, you know, major obstacles that we all face in life. And, you know, I guess it was a very big change for me, one that I hadn't necessarily seen coming. I did have some time to get used to the idea and explore it and talk to friends about it. But I'm very glad that I did. You know, I've always tried to push myself outside of my comfort zone a little bit, try and be the kind of adventurous person that I love to be in the games that I play. So if that's holding anyone back here who might be considering a change, I would say push through that fear of the unknown, because it's certainly been an amazingly rewarding experience for me.
I think one of the things that I know holds a lot of people back, and it's so if you've actually been pushed out because of this, I encourage you to push your way back in, is the degree wall. So you want to teach game development, do you have a PhD? No, but I've worked on 100 games, tough. And there's lots of game developers who I know are ready to move into academia who really want to do this. and are unable to because they don't have a PhD or a master's, or maybe in some cases even a bachelor's. But that's changing, and I'm noticing people, institutions accepting people or willing to work with people who don't have the terminal degree. I think another challenge for a lot of game developers coming in is, especially if they're coders, so they're coming from game industry code salary and they hear about academic salary, and
Biggest laugh of the afternoon.
yeah. and it's a shock. And I will say, one of the things though is being able to balance, and it's full-time academic and then slamming game development in everywhere in all the available hours. Supplementing whatever you're doing professionally with whatever you get from academia with consulting and other game dev stuff. But yeah, that's a wall for many.
I've experienced all of this, so I won't go back over it again. For me, the most interesting challenge is I never realized how much of my personal sense of self was tied up with I am a game developer.
Oh, yeah.
And I used, now what do I put on credit card applications?
Manager. No.
Yeah, no. But that's been a surprisingly steep hurdle that I'm not actually over yet, because I didn't have the advantage that some other people who've made this transition had, in that I'm building something from scratch. The Dean and Sam's Gaming Academy literally doesn't exist yet. We're seating our first class on August 27th, a date that is burned in my brain out of terror.
Yeah.
But it's been a full-time job and a half for me, and my plan, my big master plan, was I was going to do a little startup on the side. I had some folks who wanted to fund it, and no, not yet. I'm hoping a year from now, I'll be able to get back to making some smaller games. But right now, I can't do that. So what do I call? Tell me what I call myself.
You're a game designer.
Game developer.
Yeah, you're a
right?
game developer, yeah.
Okay.
And I think you can own that. You're Warren Spector.
Oh, good Lord.
Hi, Warren.
Do they have a code for that?
Hey, there's no
iOS
death matching with Warren Spector at this show.
There could be. He's
Yeah,
playing again
see,
at 4:30.
you can just go down there.
Yeah, won't be happening.
Brenda and I both own a game company, and it's right across the street from UCSC, so it's really lucky for us that UCSC loves that we actually stay active in the industry so we can keep on teaching the latest and greatest. So we basically just walk across the street, back and forth.
I'm actually jealous of that, too. We warned you this was going to be a conversation, right? You guys have each other.
Yeah.
And I describe myself as a guy sitting alone in a room with no windows, It's awesome in a way, because I just get to make a bunch of stuff up. It's like the early phases of the game I'm making right now is the Gaming Academy. It's very strange.
You're basically, what do they need to know?
Yeah.
What do I want to teach them?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and this kind of relates to one more challenge that I have faced, which is the challenge of learning a new profession. Because while I do have a little riff about the commonalities between being a game designer and a teacher, of course, being a full-time educator is his own profession. There's a lot to learn. So,
Yeah, I'd never heard the word assessment until about 2 months ago.
Oh, yeah, they're going to judge you.
Who knew? You get an A for play.
When I first started teaching, I remember, I'm sure Ian Schreiber's out there somewhere, maybe not, but when I was talking with, hi Ian, when I was just getting into teaching, I remember like a week before I did have this tremendous crisis of like, what if I don't know anything? What if, and I really did, like, what if my students, what if I come in and they're like, no kidding, right? And I had this overwhelming feeling like I had nothing. And he said, Brenda, you can go in and just talk about hitting a milestone. You can talk about just what is your day like in a game development studio. And that'll be new stuff. But I remember Ian having to talk me off the edge. This is after 25 years in game development. One would have hoped I'd picked up something, right? But I did. I had that feeling, and it was all new to me, like having to, prepare lectures or grading homework. It was, but still, very rewarding.
Yeah. Well, so now that I've asked about challenges, I mean, what are the rewards or surprises even that you've encountered as you've shifted into academia? I mean, both Warren and Richard sort of gestured at this idea that actually when you start heavily designing an academic curriculum, whether on a broad scale or for a class, it is some of the work that you've been doing for your whole lives of game design. What are other surprises like that, or if one of you guys wants to unpack that thought a little more?
For me, and this is actually riffing off something Warren said, to me, building an academic program, to me, feels like building a game. And I'm shipping students.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Exactly right.
And it's very similar. Like, what are all the systems? What are the things they need to know? And building that and making sure they get it all. And also, like, we're in our first year, and you guys are nowhere close to your first year, but it's iterative no matter what. You have to change because the industry changes. And so seeing, well, okay, so now we're the sequel. It's the next year. How do we want to change it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this relates to my riff about the commonalities between being, say, a lead game designer and a teacher. I was really pleasantly surprised by just how much there is in common between my new life as a professor and my life as a lead game designer, because the classes that I teach are studio classes. So just as at Naughty Dog, where I would work with a group of game designers, and we would all be making work and looking at it and talking about it and giving each other notes and debating the qualities of the gameplay. So I still do, just with people with a little less experience, but who are amazing game designers, bursting with ideas, bursting with like critical thought and ideas for innovation and originality. And like you say, Brenda, it's we're developing systems, processes, and we get to iterate on them semester by semester.
Yeah, the way I think about it is, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and the students are the enemy. But seriously, I'm approaching this very much like I would if I were creating a game. And in fact, the first day of classes, if any of you have already applied or want to apply or anything, just be warned. Day one, comment one from me, statement one is going to be, welcome to the Dean Sam's Gaming Academy version beta 1.0. Nice. Because we're going to be changing it constantly. Yeah. Because, I mean, what I knew 6 months ago might be out of date already. You really have to keep making games to stay relevant. I think that's critical.
Totally. Yeah, which is what we do. We actually have a game that's about to ship, and we just started developing another big game.
I am so jealous.
We also do consulting too, so we get lots of input on what's happening, and it's useful for the students to hear, because we talk about other stuff too. We don't just here's what we're teaching in this class, but we also talk about like here's the latest thing that's happening in the industry and what that means, and just kind of keep everybody up on like it's about learning constantly everything that's happening, and it's all relevant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of, I don't know if you have a little more to unpack there, but I'm interested in unpacking just a little bit more sort of what you, the collective you, can bring that's unique to academic programs because you have this ongoing and past industry experience, because you've shipped games. From your perspective, sort of as AAA superstars, as our panel has titled you all.
Totally, sorry. I didn't put the mic back on. Bad me.
So I was just asking specifically to go off of what John was saying, the idea that coming from industry, there are special unique things that they can bring to academic programs. I'd be interested in what more you guys think you do bring from that stance.
Well, having made tons of games and shipped tons of stuff and been doing it for decades, that experience is not anything that most students get. And I think that's really, really valuable because we can talk about decades and how it was in that decade. We can talk about lots of things we've tried. We've tried, we've failed, we've done lots of stuff over the years, and having that experience, we can tell them what's common and what doesn't change and what's really important.
And I think in the case of all of us, our experience is very recent too. And in a business and in a medium that changes so rapidly, I think recent experience is critical. Like right now, I'm in the process of hiring 2 full-time faculty members, and one of my requirements is that your experience has come in the last 3 years, and I'm even ashamed to say 3 years. I want your experience to have been 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So recent experience, I think, as well as long-term experience.
Last shipped game.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing where I see that there's a lot of value is going back to how similar it is to being a lead game designer. And even though if I'm working with somebody in industry, I want my lead to have lots of experience, not because I feel that she has done great things during that time, but with the lots of experience, I know that she has seen things go wrong. And the value in a lead to me is that they've seen stuff go off the rails, she can spot it a mile away, and she's not going to panic about it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the value in a lead. And you see, over the course of 30 years, you see a lot of stuff happen. And so, you know, for instance, our students just hit alpha, you know, and I let them know, and I'm sure you guys deal with this too. I said, and I saw some of you out in the audience, so I won't mention you by name, but I know roughly where you're sitting, Ian. I'm sorry. Did I say I wouldn't say your name, Ian? It's all Ians. Anybody named Ian, I'll be referencing you all talk. Anyway, but our students, you know, you can see that just this, like, everything, there's no way we could possibly hit alpha. Everything's going to go to hell. The whole world's going to catch on fire. And just letting them know, like, you know what, somehow alpha will happen and the world will not catch on fire. And you're going to be thrilled when it gets there. And that's not to say that when we're shipping, we don't feel the same way.
Well, I mean, that's what I've tried to do. TJ's in the front row and chuckling about this very issue because, you know, we try and bring the sort of structured methodology for our students that we've learned in the industry that we've had to kind of struggle to get to grips with in the industry, how to hit alpha well, how to not slip beta. And I think it's always really valuable to make yourself vulnerable to the students, to tell them, look, I know you're working really hard and maybe it hasn't gone as well as you might have liked to make your game feature complete, and let me tell you about that one time on this one project where we managed to pull it out of the fire at the last minute.
That freedom to fail is critical, you know. In the game business, if I fail too often or too frequently or too recently, I get fired. In an academic setting, every failure is a learning opportunity. One of the things that it absolutely freaks the administrators out when I talk to them about this, but I actually want to engineer failure into the program because every failure is a learning opportunity, and it's safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Tracy who really drew my attention to the fact that in a way, a big failure is a better learning experience than a big success when you're just learning how to be a game developer. So, I always try and you know, embody that rapid prototyping credo: fail early, fail fast, fail often in everything that we do, you know, in the program.
And I always say to follow up on something Brenda said, you know, the game is not the product in my course. The people and the knowledge they gain are the product and the experience. Yeah, we can, at least I hope, we can take what would take years to learn and compress it into year. You know, I mean, you're not going to get it overnight, but I think we can do a lot of compression and career acceleration in an academic setting that we don't have the time to do if we have the skill to do in our real life.
And with freedom to fail comes tremendous freedom to experiment and to innovate.
Because you got to do something to fix it. And we had the same experience with, like, right now, even like with our alphas, where we've had some teams hit a wall where they know that they haven't done something great and they have to do something to fix it, because we push innovation constantly while we're teaching. It's like, if you're not doing something innovative and new and exciting, you shouldn't be making that game. So that's kind of like one of our high bars that they have to hit, and they know when they haven't hit it, and then it's time for a redesign or it's a reboot or something. So they've kind of hit that failure point that they've recognized, and then they get to fix it, and fix it in crunch mode.
We can keep going.
Yeah, no, I know you can. I sort of don't want to cut you off. I sort of want to hear the four of you talk a little bit about crunch vis-a-vis the academy. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that.
I absolutely do. I think it relates to what we were just talking about, because you know, part of the reason that we want to teach a structured production methodology is so we can have the conversation about quality of life. And certainly I have given it to myself as a mandate to address this issue very directly with my students. You know, the game industry historically has had a problem with crunch, with people working too hard for too long and hurting themselves physically and psychologically, and often leaving the industry, leading to, you know, this terrible wastage of experience. You know, some of our most experienced people leaving the industry and going to a profession where they can have a better better work-life balance. I mean, I think that the game industry has managed to really start to work to get this under control in a lot of very responsible ways in the last decade or so, really. But I think that we have great opportunities as educators to have really frank conversations with our students about this. And while I'm a big fan of working hard and in a sustained way for the right amount of time to achieve excellence at a certain critical stage of the project, I really try and encourage my students not to crunch, in the way that some people do to their detriment. I don't know how you guys feel about this.
There's, it's interesting because the quality of life. I mean, I feel, I have conflicted thoughts on it, right? Because I get up in the morning and I'm awake and I'm reading about games, or I'm playing a game, and then I go to work and I'm talking about or working on games for 8 to 10 hours, and then I come home and I'm working on games for a couple hours. Then I might play a game before I go to bed. And this is pretty much my life, and that is quality for me. It would
Yes,
drive other
right.
people to institutions, I'm sure, not of higher learning, but the other kind. But that to me is a quality life, and I also recognize that's not for everybody.
It's also a choice for you. I mean, for many of us,
I don't feel like it was, though. I've been making, I don't feel like I ever
Well, it's
had
very
another
different
living
from-
I could have had.
you have a milestone coming up. You've got your publisher throws in a demo that that is required in a week, and no, you can't have more time. I mean, that's not a choice. That's,
No,
you
okay,
just
that's
have
right.
to do it.
Yeah, so I still have that publisher, so I still eat that.
Okay.
But that said, I don't want the students to overwork themselves. I feel like our milestones are reasonable, and we do talk about that. Like I tell them about the CEO I worked for, who says he's going to make everybody crunch in January and February, and I was on the team, and I said, why? And he said, because we did it last year and it worked great. And I thought
But there's no goal that you're trying to hit. Don't care.
that's an actual conversation. So I tell the students about that. Like that's well, thanks, I'm leaving. Crunch. And we talk about all the various ways it shows up. The death marches that I've been on, I had to crunch for 9 months, 7 days a week. And we talk about the range of it because you don't want to go into a place where that's happened. And hopefully what I try to encourage is you're working on your game every single day. Leaving, not planning well ends to disaster in the end and leads to these type of crunches. I think that's the same stuff we would do in industry.
Having said that, okay, true confessions, there are times when crunch is really cool. It's bonding and it's energizing.
Yeah.
It's pretty damn cool a lot of the time. Just there are times when it's not, and I think what we have to do is communicate to our students, when it's too much and why you want to do it and what are the values that can be gained from it and what are the damages that can be done by it. But I'll tell you, the freakiest thing to me, maybe I shouldn't say this because it's going to sound like I'm an advocate of crunch in a big way, but the University of Texas shuts its buildings down at 11 o'clock at night. You're not allowed in the building after 11. And I'm going, wow, that's so not like game development.
There's no crunch happening there,
That's the middle of the afternoon for a
Yeah.
Yeah, my best working hours after that time.
Well, everyone takes their laptops outside then.
That'll probably be no, that won't be what happens.
At our
we won't do that.
At our small company, when we started this last company, Loot Drop, in 2010, and we started working on our first game, we had a really small office space, and we had maybe, eight people or 10 people working on it, and then our company grew to 40, and we'd moved two different times. But everybody remembers that first space, and the crunch that we were on is just like the best time they've ever had in game development. And it's just because it was a small team. We loved what we were doing, which is the big differentiator between crunch and not crunch. And everybody got to know each other really well, and everyone liked each other.
But for me, it's just part and parcel of best practices and
Yeah.
good methodology. It's just a question of saying to the guys something as simple as, hey, maybe the time when you should be working hard on your project is not at the end, but in the middle. When you're heading towards alpha and beta. Because if you're all frazzled at the end, you'll make silly mistakes at the last minute and ruin, an otherwise perfectly brilliant game.
Well,
go
ahead.
And these are the kinds of things that you have to win through experience, I think, unless you can kind of...
Also, just like planning correctly, which is obviously what everybody harps on about. Bad planning leads to crunch. leaving lots of time in your milestones is really helpful. Like right now, one of the games that we're developing, we turned in our 3rd milestone. We're already working on the 5th one. And so we're like months ahead, which is really great because if it ever gets to a point where, beta is looking like it's going to be taking some extra time, we have tons of padding. And so if you can plan that and get the right number of people to do that, then you don't have a crunch.
Matthew Burns said this really interesting thing last year that has stayed with me and that I've tried to use. He said that he feared that because maybe as teachers of game design, we might not have our eye on the ball of the scope of our students' designs as we might have at the beginning of their processes. And then when we get to what I believe is technically known as the oh shit moment in the middle of a project, when we suddenly realize how much we have left to do, the students kind of in school might tend to learn that they have to work harder and harder and harder towards the end. So now, as a teacher of game design, I'm trying to make sure that I work really hard at the beginning of the project with my students to make sure that their projects are well scoped. And then all of this other good stuff kind of leads from that in a very natural way that leads toward best practices.
Yeah, the scoping is like massively important. That's like so unbelievably important. Errors at the beginning magnify over time. That's just like basic common sense.
Yeah.
And so we have a really great advisory board that's there to choose. We have our teams design 3 pitches, and the advisory board, which is all industry people and academics, basically as many of them come as possible to vet these pitches. And then they get to choose, and they get to just critique it, and just scope is like the #1 thing that they look at, whether it's even doable or not. And then from that point, then they can kind of go on with the thing that the industry panel has decided, this is good, but you need to do this, and try and help us scope at the very beginning before they make more errors.
That's another interesting advantage of having people who've just come out of the industry. I have plenty of friends that I can shame into participating in this program. So we have a development council as well that's going to be part of the absolutely terrifying review process, I hope. I mean, 'cause it's kind of intimidating going. I mean, I've had to pitch to the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, and I remember back in the day pitching to the CEO of Electronic Arts and the executive vice president of sales and everything. I mean, it's pretty intimidating. I want students to have that experience too, because you're inevitably going to get up in front of people who are going to make you stutter and stammer, and getting that experience before you actually have to do it to get paid, I think, is a really good thing.
This relates. I don't know why what you said made me think of this, but what an early question, the challenges. One of the things that, and you also mentioned something about this, going from industry into academia, and you mentioned that it's a whole different profession, which is obvious. But just because you are a game developer, maybe you're even an award-winning game developer, doesn't mean that you have the foggiest idea how to captivate a room full of people and how to. And I wished that there had been some little boot camp for. So you're a game designer and you'd like to come teach people. I'm a teacher. Let me tell you what I know about working with students. Nobody on a milestone comes up to me I've never had to massively alter someone's life to say, you failed this course and I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to graduate. Oh my God, it's like the worst thing I can imagine, and I had to do it.
UT has someone like that, actually. I mean, I'm sure they have many, but there's a woman in the College of Communication where I am whose job is to work with teachers to make them better teachers.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I meet with her not right
That's
now
great.
because I'm too busy, but I was meeting with her every Thursday, and I intend to get back into that at some point.
I think this is, in fact, the session where the game designers who may or may not be sitting in the audience and are thinking about moving to academia would love those 5 pieces of advice that each of you wish someone had given you before
I'm accepting
you made the
applications
jump.
now, by the way, both for students and for faculty.
But do you have, do you have thoughts, things that you would tell to a colleague who came to you and said, I'm thinking about going and teaching. What should I know? What should I do? How can I prepare?
Learn the meaning of the word assessment and learn the meaning of the word rubric.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Although the rubric's just the rules of the game, isn't it? It's the stuff at the end that tells you the ground conditions for the class.
I would say if you're thinking about it, start now on getting your resume and your background together. Every game, every article, every award, everything on your resume, because to get a resume that if you're going to work at Naughty Dog, you're going to
CV,
put one thing
yeah.
together. But if you're preparing I'm heading into academia CV, that's a massive deal. Like when John was looking at going to UCSC, and I asked, so let me see your resume, and I don't have one.
You didn't have to make a resume, did you?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have to make a resume.
Wow.
They just let me skate through.
Yeah, basically. Well, UCSC is this huge machine.
Well,
you know,
what do you
so
think? He's at a machine.
Yeah. That's
Oh, yeah,
State
you're right.
schools.
Yeah, I'm at
So-
a big machine
So we,
with lots of grit
but
and
no,
gears.
it was all.
They knew who you are.
But it was all the way back to, every award, all the articles, and that's important because especially if you don't have a PhD, and he doesn't, right? You have to, and I have I have a bachelor's, and I'm partway through a master's. If you don't have that, you have to justify it with experience, and all that experience needs to be verified on paper. It was a pretty massive undertaking to do that.
I don't know how generalizable this is, but my program is currently a certificate program. The university didn't want to dive into a full degree program until it was proved out. And as part of a certificate program, applicants for faculty positions don't have to, I get to just pick. Yeah, it's you.
It's like an interview. Just
Wow.
a
Yeah,
game
yeah,
company.
that's essentially, I determined the requirements, the job requirements, and I get to interview people, and then I get to pick. And it's kind of the same with the students. The students don't have to go through the standard, the main building, which is where the admissions department is. They don't have to go through any of that.
I would,
So go for a certificate program.
if you're a game developer and you're thinking of doing it, I would do it. Man, I love working with students so much. And I love that, like I'm working on the Trail of Tears game right now. What's the ship they don't know? And that I have that kind of freedom to pursue projects that nobody in the right mind would ever publish. And that I'm working with students who are just so incredibly excited. Like after they hit alpha and they showed their games in front of the review board, the happiness that I saw among them was enough to power me through GDC. Isn't it? It's so exciting.
It really is
Love it.
amazing. I guess that would be maybe my biggest piece of advice, that you may have heard teachers say, what makes this experience so meaningful is the students, but it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. The energy, the ideas, the enthusiasm of the people that we teach is the most incredibly sustaining thing, I think, about the experience.
Yep.
Another piece of advice is, I guess this kind of connects to what you guys have been saying. I feel like I began to learn how to be a teacher here at GDC, really, by being lucky enough to be able to give talks, by going to roundtables, actually, and beginning to learn how to have a debate in front of a room of 30 people, meeting people in the halls, meeting some of my heroes, so I think that if you, once long ago on PBS, I wish I could remember the name of the motivational speaker, but it was a talk about transforming your life. If you were perhaps not completely happy with what you were doing and you wanted to create a new career for yourself, then the advice that this person gave was to not change it all at once, don't quit your day job and throw all your savings into this new thing, but do it bit by bit. So consider, giving a talk at a local community college or, a local university. Get involved with the IGDA or, with some other game development organization and see where it leads. Because I think that I'm very lucky that sort of happened to me quite serendipitously.
Yeah.
Suddenly, without my realizing it, without my planning it, suddenly all the stars were aligned for me to be able to move into this role. So,
Can I ask a question related to that? So I've given a lot of talks at GDC. I've given a lot of talks at universities. And I may not be any good at it, but I'm really comfortable doing it. And I don't know how that, I haven't started teaching yet. The teaching starts in the fall. I don't know how that's going to translate to, I have to get up 3 times a week and talk for an hour and a half.
It totally translates.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Smaller audience.
It really does. It does totally translate. I have one small caveat. I found I'm always chronically over-prepared for most everything I do. And one of the tough things that, for me to learn has been that I don't need to be quite as prepared with lecture materials and stuff as I think that I need to. If I have a few good talking points for a class, the students will bring all the most brilliant information into the room. room.
That's if it's interactive.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things you need to plan is that it's going to be an interactive class and not just
That's true,
free cheat.
and not a lecture class. But I don't know if any of you guys caught the great 7 exercises for Teachers of Game Design session that was in this room this morning that John Sharp and Colleen Macklin ran. But exercises, Warren, I think they're also
I'm
they're
on
your
it.
secret weapon.
Yeah.
My classes love programming tests. Just like throw a program. Well, like
like
they're
little
gonna,
games, aren't
I
they?
guess they're when they're done with this class, they're going to be in the industry, and the more prep that they get,
Doing
the better.
more
So it's like,
tests?
here's Blizzard's test if you're a coder.
Nice.
You know, here's one that we give. You know, just like randomly, just they're not graded on it, but it's like here's what's going to happen. You know,
Interesting.
It's very useful.
You know, one of the things just with classes is I too would have this. This is exactly what we're going to talk about today. You know, beep boop kind of whatever. And the current course that I'm teaching, although I guess it's over now, but the current course that I'm teaching over now, it's finals week. It's over for me, not for you guys. So the current course it's about non-digital game design. You know, really just right down to the metal. How do you? I guess not down to the wood, down to the prototype parts, whatever.
The cardboard.
Down to the cardboard, and just looking at game mechanics and game design at its most fundamental level. And being comfortable in completely derailing a whole class. I had about, this is stupid, but this is what I did. I had 15 minutes budgeted for discussing what is a game. Right? And we actually had like guest speakers come in and you'd see like, so let's talk about, it's interesting to me, what is a game? And you'd watch my students like, oh man, this was a week.
Here we
This
go.
could,
They're
course,
still talking
what
about
is
it now, you know.
Probably, right? You know, but being flexible in some of the best conversations have happened because these are the things that we're going to talk about today, and then somehow something else happens. And that's so
Yeah.
rewarding.
Some of those
Taking notes.
serendipitous conversations can be the best.
Oh, great thing that's very different in academia that I love, whereas if I said, yeah, we're doing something really cool on our current game, what are you doing? Can't tell you, can't share.
Get used to
But
that.
in academia, it's like, well, no, I'll send you all my notes. I'll send you my stuff.
Send me all your notes.
There's no NDAs, right? So it's very open, which was something to get used to. You're going to post my slides online, you know, but it's very free, and I like that.
Yeah.
So what about the other side of this for the institutions? Should there be any institutions in the room who are interested in hiring high-level game designers to come from industry and become a part of their program or build a program? Would you have advice for institutions like that? How they can make the position more appealing? How they can
Pay better.
prepare? Pay better. How they can also prepare their institution or prepare the situation for success? Bring
Remove
somebody in
bureaucratic
and-
barriers.
Yeah.
I thought Disney had a lot of bureaucracy. Woof. Man.
Allowing professors to work on the side is great. UCSC lets students own their own IP, which is really valuable because it means that they don't have to hold back their best ideas while they're in school.
Yeah.
They can just make them and own them and take them out and publish them. That's super valuable. So, I'm sure everyone's been there where they're like, that's a great idea, but I'm not going to do anything about it yet.
I think one of the, I've already talked about the degree wall, but I know that affects so many game developers. You know, some of the best game developers in the game industry game developers in the automotive industry, obviously the game industry. Some of the best game developers don't have a degree, but they've got this knowledge that we want. So if you're unwilling to allow them to teach unless they have that formal degree, maybe give them a pathway where they could do that. You know, that's just such a needless bureaucratic barrier.
I don't have a degree.
You have a high school degree.
Oh, sorry, high school diploma.
Hey, that's why in my program I tell people there are 3 ways into the program. Graduate from an existing game development program so you kind of know how to make games already. Have 1 to 3 years experience in the game business and want to accelerate your career path, and convince me you're God's gift to gaming because I don't want to be the guy who turns away the next John Romero or Richard Lemarchand. I'm not going to be that guy.
I guess if I had a piece of advice for an institution looking to attract people from one of the many different game industries to their school, it might be to think about what the value proposition is, for that person. And I think that universities and other kinds of educational institutions have an amazing opportunity right now when so many folks who have worked in one part of the game industry or another have this burning desire to make unique, innovative, idiosyncratic work. And that, as you were just talking about, Brenda, we have great opportunities to do that in the Academy. So that's certainly something that drew me to USC. I'm working on an independent design research project right now, and doing things that I always tried to get started when I was working as a full-time professional AAA developer, that I just couldn't do because my whole mind was full of whatever project I was working on. And in any case, I've often said that being at USC is like being at GDC every day. I love GDC so much. It would be my 1 week of the year where I'd really get to come and talk about games and play and the process of designing these cultural artifacts in a sort of different, unconstrained way, and that's a freedom that we also have in the Academy. So you have a lot to draw people to you. So consider how you can articulate that to folks when you're doing a job search or whatever.
All right. I'm going to circle back once more to something that came up early because it's actually my favorite topic, which is
Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes, Richard has revealed my true favorite topic. We're going to just throw this panel out now and talk about D&D for 15 minutes. No,
Vornheim, actually. Sam's my DM in Vornheim.
But no, so we talked a couple of times about the similarities between designing curriculum, between being a teacher, between the shared skills you have, whether you're talking at GDC and how much that's like talking in a classroom, or how the systems design work you do as a game designer is like the systems design work you do in potentially building a class. So are there other things there that are really applicable? What are the similarities for you as someone leading your daily life between having been a game designer and now being a games academic? Is it a huge change, or is it a surprisingly subtle shift?
Well, in designing a program, again, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage here in that I haven't actually started this yet. But my process is you start with what is the outcome, and that's very much the way I always approach design. I mean, what do you want players to experience? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? What are the verbs? And that's exactly the way I've approached the curriculum. Again, it's not just designing a course. I'm designing an entire course of study. And it's very much that, what is the outcome? What is the output? What do the players have to have experienced along the way? So it's very similar in that respect.
I bet it's going to be a lot like running a paper game campaign for you, Warren.
Oh, if you want to talk about D&D, I'm your guy.
Tell I've got an agenda here.
Let's go. Let's go.
Rich is taking over the panel.
Well, because I think it is, those hours you spend in the evening at home drawing your maps and creating the characters, and then all of a sudden the players are there in the room. You've got your DM, your moderator's shield, and you're
Where's my
rolling the
lectern?
dice.
Don't forget they all have stat sheets which contain grades.
Oh, I'm not grading anybody.
Oh.
I've got a cunning plan for that.
Get some TAs, yeah.
No. There will be no grades in my program.
Ooh.
Saving throws.
But improvable saving.
No, I can't reveal all my secrets. Oh, wait.
I guess for us, the similarities are that we're teaching what we know, and so we're still talking about, we're constantly talking about the things that we do all the time. Like some of our classes are how to start an LLC, how to handle HR, how to get a lawyer, just all the stuff, because these people need to start companies. They need to start making stuff. They need to own IP. They need to know the value of IP versus making someone else's IP more valuable. And so we have professional courses that are just giving them all the information about, like, here's my 10 startups and how they went, and just just tons of information about not just the game stuff, but what's around the game development.
That's great.
And does that feel like the life of a game developer a little bit? I mean, in the
thing
same
is-
way
We
that you
run
juggle
companies,
it
so
all.
like it happens all the time.
Right. Your life is juggling these
You know,
20
but the thing
things.
that's changed for me tremendously, being a game developer is that, when one of the things that drew me into academia is I felt like, having started in game development in '81, there were no programs about making games. And so while I was making games, people were studying games, and they were writing about games, and they were having conversations about games. And so I would find myself going to GDC and hanging out with the academic game developers, right? And very energized by the conversations that I would be having with those people. And then I would go back, and then I would be on to the next milestone. And so going into academia, I got to read for the first time a lot of the stuff that was written years ago, like some of Greg Kostikian's early stuff, which is used heavily in academia. And I finally got to read Raf's book, Theory of Fun. And I finally got to read Homo Ludens. I finally got to read all of this stuff that I had never had an opportunity to, because while you're working in these non-QOL, get your damn milestone stuff done positions. And so for me, I now have that time. And I have time to reread books that I love. And I have time to explore questions and just to, frankly, ask ridiculous questions. Like, I had to consider the way that the tactile nature of games, which you have to make decisions and move on, but to actually pause and think that what used to be a tremendous and sometimes impossible luxury, I can now explore the most minute game design topics into the ground with a group of people who are also interested. And I like that shift in my life.
Building on something John said, I'm really glad to hear that you're talking about all the stuff around games, because as a hiring, I'm not hiring except faculty right now, but when I hired people out of game development programs, I don't want to say always, but 8 times out of 10, I would encounter 2 problems. One is they had experience making their personal passion art project, which doesn't really reflect what happens in the real world of mainstream game development, of AAA game development. And they had no clue about anything but how do you make an art game. And so one of the big things I'm trying to do with my program is exactly what you were talking about. Focus, not to the exclusion of everything else, but focus way more on culture, quality of life, business, production methodologies. The other problem that I encountered with people coming out of development programs is they so often think they know the right way to do something. And they know one of the right ways. Right. And I really want to expose people not just to the right way according to me, but in an academic setting, I think there's an opportunity to show them the various ways you can actually tackle the same problem.
If I might suggest you start with, what is the definition of game? Because there's about 90 right definitions.
Yeah, no doubt.
I had one thing on my mind to do with the similarities between being a game designer and a teacher. We've sort of touched on it a little bit so far, but I guess it's connected to the fact that I've always tried to be kind of a player-favoring game designer. So I really like the idea of a game designer as an advocate for the player and for the player's experience. And obviously, as designers, we're free to create any kind of experience for the player that we want, from one that's cozy and warm and safe to one that's like punishingly difficult and but, the kind of games that I've worked on, my personal design philosophy is to do with kind of bringing the player into the experience and then bringing them along through the experience in a way that is best for them, if I can possibly work out how to do that with my game design. So I guess just before I started working at USC, I read a little bit of Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is an American educator, and she talks about the way that in the classroom, because of the sort of implicitly hierarchical nature of the classroom, there's a possibility for oppression in there. If the professor doesn't engage with the students in the right way, if they don't draw the students out, if they don't kind of establish parity in the community of the class. And so, I don't know, I don't have strongly developed ideas around this yet, but I think it's important for us as new professors to think about this, because this is very much part of the skill, the profession of people who have been, teachers for many decades, for all their professional lives.
Okay, I do have time for one, possibly 2 questions. I saw Tracy's hand first, and then I saw somebody over here. I saw a hand over here. Oh, it was that hand.
And when I say oppression, I just mean when we're working on working critically on creative projects. That we've all heard about the horrible art crit where someone makes themselves vulnerable and then ends up crying. I do think it's important that we're direct with each other when we criticize each other. I really like Eric Zimmerman's thing about as game designers, the way we show each other respect is by being direct with one another.
Yeah.
But it's a big, complicated subject where there's lots for all of us to learn.
Okay, Tracy.
I'm not sure this is actually working after.
I'll repeat it if you, yeah.
Okay, not working, but I'll try and shout. Okay, I want to talk about industry expectations. Since you guys, are coming from industry into academia, here's something I'm always fighting. Okay, so I also came from industry, but maybe have been more on the side of academia for a while. And what I'm always getting is the industry folks coming and saying, you ought to do it like this. You ought to be doing it like this, right? And it's usually something like, hey, in industry, we have 200 people teams, so you guys got to have 200 people teams. We got to get you some 200 people teams. Okay, let's work on that, right? And I'm like, that's great, but guess what? I don't know if they're ready to be on 200 people teams yet. Maybe we should have teams of 2, and you could maybe learn to be on a team.
Because as above, so below, they're little microcosms of the macroscopic bigger team.
How do we, though, negotiate what industry wants us to be teaching and what we know they're ready to be learning? Well, I think this is a really important sort of negotiation, because you don't want to say, I don't want to teach that, because you do, but you want to teach the steps. So I throw that to you, because it's something I wonder all the time.
Do you mind? No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Warren and then Brenda.
Okay. I think you may be selling yourself a little short. As someone who hired hundreds and hundreds of people over the last several years, there was a point where having a degree, especially one in game design or development, was like it was a knock. It was against you, and that is no longer true. At this point, I don't think I hired anybody in the last 5 years who didn't come out of your program or one like it. So I think you may be selling yourself a little short, and you're doing plenty right. The one thing is, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but I think and I think some places like you guys are getting at it, and you guys are getting at it, I think somewhat larger teams are necessary, and that's why in my program, a lot of people think I'm crazy, by the way, but everybody in my program is going to work on one big, in air quotes, game. I mean, 20 people on a team I picked that number because it's just big enough to start seeing the communication and coordination problems and planning problems and I don't like you problems that you don't see on a team of 4, 6, or even 8 where, hey, we're all friends, let's work together. So I don't think you need 200, but I think you need somewhat bigger teams, which I know you guys are doing already. So you're right on track.
But I'm guessing that what Tracy's suggesting is that just as game designers, when we're designing a game for a player, it's not great to introduce too many verbs all at once. We want them to get the hang of the climbing before they do the dino jumping. I think that's what Tracy's alluding to. And so we sort of structure our teams to start small and then grow to sort of 20-person teams. Just takes a bit of deliberateness about it, I think.
What we do in our program at UCSC is we focus on real small teams, and we focus on developing like indie developers that can make an entire game themselves. And teams right now, our teams are like 3 people, like 3 designer programmers with 20 artists. So they have plenty of art.
That is crazy.
No, it's cool.
They'll never see it again.
We work with San Jose State University. So they have access to an art team. Like we tell them it's downhill from here.
Yeah, you're never going to see this quality and amount of art for a small team like that. But as the program gets bigger, we probably won't have teams that are bigger than 5 people, just so they all have really great experience. They can't hide in a big team. They have to make something that is innovative, and they all have to have a really big part of that game, so they can say, yeah, I made that huge thing, and also they feel like they really made a whole game.
To Tracy's point, it's almost like my previous week was a setup for that single question. I began my week meeting with one massive publisher, and I ended my week meeting with one massive publisher, and I had first-party interaction in the middle. And everybody knows exactly how things should be done, and none of them are in agreement with one another. And so it's really just a question of, well, you know, I'll align Scott Foe, I've credited him with this line, but it's good to know. It's very non-committal. It's good to know. I mean, you can't make a game for everybody, really, unless it's Minecraft, so now it's done. And, you know, likewise, I don't think you can necessarily make students or have a program that's for everybody. You know, so you have to, you know, what are you most skilled doing? And then go from there. But if certainly, and I felt that poll just last week, where there was, you know, and you see what fits.
I'm afraid I won't have time for the second question because we are ending in 30 seconds. Unless you can do it in 15 seconds, Stephen?
Yeah, so who are you shipping?
Who are you shipping?
John answered that a little bit, and Brenda touched on it, but who are you shipping, and how do you build the program, and what advice do you have for
15 seconds?
Heck
15
yeah.
seconds. What's your
Come on,
product?
I've been doing this forever.
My product is people who aspire to positions of leadership, production, and direction, and want to shorten the dues paying period. There, so instead of 10 years, it takes you 5.
Yeah, innovators, industry leaders, and craftspeople, I think.
Indie devs. You
Ours
said it.
are indie devs. They own their own company, and they build small teams and great games.
Awesome. I also wanted to take a chance, my little plug chance here real quick at the end, to make sure you all know that the 3rd edition of Tracy Fullerton's Game Design Workshop came out this week. It features sidebars from Richard and Brenda, a designer's perspective from Warren, and there's a whole chapter analyzing Quake vis-a-vis Go Fish. There are discounted copies available for GDC attendees, and I have tickets for them. So right here at the end, if you want one, come up and grab one from me. And please, can we have a huge round of applause for our panel? They did a fantastic job. And thank you all for coming out. Have a good GDC.